is any part of the coroner's role to identify whether there's somebody who's responsible for the death?
Who has died? When did they die? Where did they die? And how did they come about their death?
Why has the death been referred to the coroner at all?
Whilst we talk about all these very legalistic and clinical terms, there is a person at the centre of this that it's all about.
I think one of the most important parts of our role is to prepare people.
When you get to court, this is where you need to go, this is who you'll meet, this is what will happen next.
Hopefully we can make a difficult process a little bit easier to bear. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Medical Negligence Matters. Today we're going to talk about the difficult subject of inquests. When somebody dies unexpectedly, their loved ones are often seeking answers above all else. But to what extent can an inquest actually provide those answers? And with me to talk about that today is my friend and colleague, Rachael Bewers. Hello, Rachael.
Hello.
Thanks for being here. So let's start with the question that many families ask straight away. Why has the death been referred to the coroner at all? Because not all deaths are.
No. And in most cases, they don't need to be referred to the coroner, but where the death is sudden or unexpected, or the circumstances leading up to the death are unclear, the coroner will need to be involved.
And does an inquest automatically mean that somebody's done something wrong or that somebody is at fault?
No, absolutely not. Some cases that might be the case, but certainly it's not the coroner's job to look into that. It's really to answer the question, to understand the circumstances leading to the death.
So yes, the fact that a case has been referred to the coroner doesn't necessarily mean that it's anything sinister.
No, absolutely not. It's really just to get the facts and understand really four questions as far as the coroner is concerned. Who has died? When did they die? Where did they die? And how did they come about their death? And usually in the cases that come across our firm, those first three questions are really easy to answer. We do know the answer to those questions. But in terms of how the person came about their death, that's really where the time is spent, certainly by the coroner, in working that out. And
so what they're looking at is not necessarily the medical condition or the incident that led to the death, but sometimes it's the circumstances leading up to that, isn't it? So it can be quite a broad spectrum.
Absolutely. And it's even, I suppose, in cases or situations where we know that somebody was ill anyway, but actually the progression of the disease didn't follow what you'd usually expect, and that has led to their death. The coroner may be involved in those sorts of situations as well to try and make sense of those events leading up to it.
And in your experience, I mean, how do families react when they hear or they learn that there's going to be an inquest?
Daunted initially. It's not a process that many people, fortunately, have to go through. So it's something that's really unfamiliar, very alien in terms of the language that is used, the process, what's required of them as well. So I think it's quite an overwhelming thought for families.
Yes, I can imagine it is. And I suppose that what's important for people to understand, and I think where perhaps we can help people at an early stage, is to understand what an inquest can and cannot do and what its real purpose is, isn't it? And I think it can be quite difficult for families to understand that. So what can an inquest actually achieve?
I think there will be answers that come out of an inquest, but they will be the questions will very much be decided by the coroner. So it's the coroner's job to decide the scope of the investigation that they need to complete in order to answer those four questions. Now, it might be that the families have some concerns about the treatment that was provided at multiple clinical centres. It might be that they have concerns about treatment that happened a long time ago. But from the coroner's point of view, they might think, actually, to answer those four questions, I only need to look at this small part of the treatment or the care that was being provided that led up to that person's death.
And is any part of the coroner's role to to identify whether there's somebody who's responsible for the death?
Not specifically, no. Now, it might be that in the course of the investigation, information or facts come out that, by implication, seem to suggest that somebody, either as an individual or a clinical centre, might be partially responsible for that death.
So that their actions might have in some way contributed to it.
Yeah, by something they've done or haven't done.
Yeah, but a coroner will be very careful, won't they, not to apportion blame.
It's not the coroner's job to do that, absolutely not.
And that can be something that's quite difficult for families to understand.
I think so, particularly where they might already have concerns that there have been failings in care. They might want to hear something that really does help them to understand that, whether that is the case or not. And that doesn't always come out as part of an inquest investigation.
So if an inquest isn't about blame, and it very much isn't, what do you think is the important thing or the meaningful positive outcome that can come out of an inquest?
It's an unusual opportunity that not all families get when a loved one has died, to really understand the treatment and the decisions that were being made at every point in the treatment journey. So as part of the inquest investigation, the coroner will ask for evidence from often the treating clinicians. So they will be able to provide information and more context, really, about the decisions they were making and why.
Yes, that's an important point, isn't it? Because I think that although an inquest isn't particularly concerned with failings in medical care, the coroner will want to understand what the detail of what has happened to an individual patient. And it is an opportunity, isn't it, to, I suppose, at a very early stage, to hear evidence from people who were actively involved in the care on the hospital side of things, where in a clinical negligence claim, you wouldn't normally hear that evidence until very much later.
Yes, exactly that. So very early on, you can get an awful lot of factual background and information that, yes, you otherwise wouldn't hear.
And have you seen cases at all where an inquest has changed the direction of a clinical negligence case?
Yes, from an early stage, actually. We've been able to hear evidence and seen documentation, which has enabled us to, in terms of the clinical negligence investigation that we would usually do ourselves, we've been able to sort of not miss out the first couple of steps, but it means that we don't need to go to certain experts for particular reports, because information that's come out at the inquest has already told us what we need to know in relation to that.
And perhaps also identified avenues for investigation which might not have been obvious.
Yes, or opened up different avenues of investigation as well. So it really helps to hone where we go and what we're going to do in terms of our own inquiries.
Yeah, as an evidence gathering exercise,
yes.
It can be really important, can't it? So tell us a little bit about what happens at an inquest.
It's not very dramatic in any way, shape or form, but so you'll have a coroner who sits almost like a judge. And there will be the witnesses who the judge wants to hear from, also in the courtroom. The family will be there if they want to be. They don't. There's no requirement for them to be there, but in my experience, they do want to be there. There will also be potentially members of the press, because it's open court. So members of the public are allowed to attend if they want to, but that's really very unusual.
I mean, sometimes we do come across situations where in advance of the main inquest, a coroner will have a pre-inquest review. And what's the purpose of that, in your experience?
That's an opportunity for the coroner to make sure that they have all of the information and evidence they need to be able to answer those 4 specific questions. So the coroner will invite the family, the hospital trusts and any other clinicians who are involved as part of the investigation for their input as to what they're able to provide, what they think might be relevant. And it's a really good stock take opportunity to make sure that by the time you get to the inquest, the coroner has everything they need, all the information and evidence they need to be able to draw a conclusion.
So yes, that's I suppose a sort of a housekeeping type exercise, isn't it? It's just making sure, and a coroner at that point can take representations from members of the family and sometimes from the treating hospital about the sort of evidence that could be suggested as relevant or helpful to the coroner. And in the hearing itself, how does the questioning happen?
So there will be sort of a witness table or a box for the witness to sort of position themselves in. The coroner will firstly ask some questions if they want some clarification on the evidence that person is presenting. And then after that, there'll be an opportunity for the family to ask questions if they want clarification on any areas, or if they want to sort of unpick or scratch beneath the surface, really, of the evidence that's being provided. And the hospital trusts as well, or other clinicians will also have that same opportunity to ask questions.
And in most cases, isn't it correct that the coroner will often have witness statements from the individuals in advance? So quite often the main gist of the evidence that any individual can give will be contained in a witness statement. So the questioning will be to seek to clarify or expand upon that.
That's right. The inquest itself won't be the first time that the family has seen the evidence that that's being presented to the coroner. So that will all be presented in a bundle, and all of the documents and witness evidence will be in there and circulated to everybody. All the interested parties is the technical term. That includes the family and all of the hospital trusts and their representatives. Now, there is an opportunity for families to read through that beforehand, obviously. But if we are supporting and advising those families, we will read through those bundles and work out in advance if there is anything that we think it would be helpful for the coroner to also see in addition to that. Any more witness evidence where maybe a different doctor is mentioned, but there doesn't seem to be a statement from them, we can really be proactive in suggesting to the coroner that they might like to ask for a wider range of evidence or information.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't it? So you have that opportunity in advance to plug any potential gaps. And I think you said earlier on that it's not essential for the family to give evidence, is it? But I think often the coroner will want to hear from at least one family member.
Yeah, so it's quite common for a coroner to ask well in advance for something called a life letter or a statement on behalf of the family, which will explain their point of view, give their perspective on what they were experiencing or what they were seeing in terms of the treatment that was being delivered. The life letter in particular is also a really great opportunity for the family to describe to the coroner and the rest of the court who their loved one was. Because whilst we talk about all these very legalistic and clinical terms, there is a person at the centre of this that it's all about, and somebody that was very loved. So the life letter really is an opportunity for families to explain who that person was and what they meant to them.
Yes, that's a very important point. And I think it, of the utmost importance to the family, because you're quite right. It's easy for the individual to get lost in the process, isn't it? And it's important for the reality of the individual of their life and the impact on their loved ones of their loss is really taken into account in all of it. The questioning process, I mean, as you said earlier, the inquest is the coroner's process, isn't it?
Yes.
So the coroner ultimately will control what questions can and cannot be asked. And I mean, how, in your experience, how does that work? How does the coroner really control the extent of the questioning?
So the coroner, from the outset, will have decided what the scope of the investigation will be. Now, any questioning that comes that the coroner believes falls outside of that scope, they will very politely interrupt and suggest that maybe that falls outside the scope, and is not required for the purposes of the inquest on that day. So
there can be some limit.
There is some limit.
Yeah.
There's not an endless amount of time or an endless amount of possibilities of questions that will be allowed by the coroner.
I imagine, well, I know that it can be sometimes very difficult for family members to listen to some of the evidence that can come out in an inquest. And how could we deal with that?
There's no requirement for the family to sit through all of the evidence. If they feel that certain parts are going to be more difficult, then they are absolutely okay to leave the room. They don't need to ask permission to do that. But if at any point they start to feel overwhelmed, if there's been a post-mortem, for example, and the pathologist is giving evidence, that is one part of the inquest where families can struggle, because it's really difficult to hear about your loved one being talked about in that way. But I have to say, the whole inquest is difficult, and we are honest with our clients about that.
I think that's interesting. I think one of the most important parts of our role is to prepare people for the inquest process. And how do you go about doing that?
I think firstly it's demystifying it. So just explaining, okay, when you get to court, this is where you need to go, this is who you'll meet, this is what will happen next, and just taking them through the day, so the practical side, to take away any sort of misconceptions about what needs to happen. And then just being, as I say, very honest about the fact that this will be difficult, it will be emotionally draining, and appreciating that we are dealing with people who are still very much grieving for the loss of their loved one and adjusting to a new way of life.
We're there to support, aren't we, really? And I think that you made the point that it's not essential for the families to sit through all of the evidence. And I think the importance of having representation there, or having somebody there to support and to ask the questions, is that we can carry on representing their interests, even if they don't feel able emotionally to sit through all of the very difficult evidence that they could be hearing. And actually that occurs to me, another thought occurs to me while we were talking about that. You did mention earlier on the presence of the press. And this is something that can be quite difficult for a family, isn't it? Because, as I said, we can't exclude the press. It's an open court hearing. And how, in your experience, do families cope with that?
They don't have to engage with the press at all. And in my experience, it won't be until the inquest has been concluded that the press may want to try and talk to the family. And it's completely up to them whether they do or not.
Yes, of course, some families do, don't they?
Yes.
And I suppose if they do, it's helpful sometimes in advance to have prepared some thoughts about what you want to say. And we can help with that.
Yes, absolutely. We can help with that. And definitely not saying something off the cuff in the heat of the moment when emotions are running really high. That's probably the worst time to be talking to somebody who's going to be recording those thoughts and comments.
I think the important thing is to be prepared in advance with some ideas of what you might want to say.
Yeah.
As I say, without hope, or without hopefully expressing or losing oneself in too much of the emotion of it. And just thinking finally about how an inquest ties in with a clinical negligence claim, because they're very different processes, aren't they, really? And can an inquest and a negligence claim proceed at the same time? Yes, absolutely. They are very separate. One doesn't depend on the other. While there's an inquest, while we're waiting for the inquest to happen, we can start our investigations into the clinical negligence claim side of it. It might be that we want to wait until after the inquest has concluded before submitting a formal clinical negligence claim, because, as you've said, there's a lot of information and evidence that comes out as part of that inquest process. Yes, it can be quite an important way, isn't it, of getting an earlier access, as we've said, to evidence which normally in a clinical negligence claim wouldn't be available until a much later date. And so finally, what, in your view, is the importance of having support through the process? It makes an incredible amount of difference for the family themselves. They're not going into it blind, not knowing exactly what's going to happen on the day. We're able to support them in practical terms, but also in terms of the advice as well. And the work that we can do before getting to the inquest means that hopefully they will have as many questions answered as they possibly can. So hopefully we can make a difficult process a little bit easier to bear. Yes. Rachael, thank you so much for being here today. It's really helpful to hear all of your experience in this area. Thank you. Thanks very much.